like I can play a show and be completely in my anxiety tunnel for half the set, and then all of a sudden it just somehow, for some reason, goes away, and then I'm like suddenly present, and I don't know how I just did the first half of the set without even being conscious.
Daydreaming today. Welcome to How Musicians Make It, a show about artistry and industry in music. My name's Adam, and I'm your host. And today, I'm talking to Whistler Isaiah, the drummer from the great band Hippo Campus, which has something like 3.3 million monthly listeners on Spotify. They're crushing it everywhere they go with sold-out shows. And just coming up with these amazing songs. And Whistler is an artist himself. He is a singer and songwriter who plays guitar as well. And so he's released some music in the last couple of years that I've been really enjoying. And so I talked to Whistler about the music that he makes and how it differs from working with Hippo Campus. We also talk about Hippo Campus and what it's like to tour with a band when you started in high school and went straight from high school to touring, and whether they're good communicators or not, and how they handle the communication aspect of keeping a band together for a long time. They've been touring now for 10 years, and it's hard to grasp that, since I knew them when they were in high school. I substitute taught at the school, St. Paul Conservatory for Performing Artists in downtown St. Paul, where all the members of Hippo Campus went to high school. And I did that because my wife was teaching there at the time. She did like 3 or 4 years there. So really, they were her students in various different contexts, band and music theory and things like that. And I got to know them a little bit as young people, and then got to see them crush, right? And just go on the road and totally crush. And so it was really great to catch up with Whistler. I've also played softball with Whistler and played softball with his dad for a long time. So it's interesting the various different connections that we've had over the years. And it's been really fun to watch his success and listen to his music and hear the heart and soul in his music. He's really a wonderful artist and is very open about dealing with things like anxiety, dealing with things like performance anxiety. Whistler was in the circus as a young kid too, so he's got a really interesting history, and we dig into all that stuff. So it's a great conversation. This podcast is brought to you by Gig Boss, which is an app that's free on iOS and Android, and it's a way for you to organize your busy career as a musician. That was one of the hardest things for me. I was a full-time trumpet player for 10 years in Minneapolis before becoming a university professor, and I'm still actively performing and touring, and I use my app to organize all my stuff. So I enter all the details of my gigs, and then I have a books page that tracks all the finances and everything, which will be launched soon. It's a really cool... The hardest part for me as a full-time artist was keeping track of my schedule and also dealing with tax time, dealing with how much did I actually make this year. And if that resonates with you, Gig Boss is a great tool. I hate spreadsheets. I never used spreadsheets. I tried to keep track of everything on Google Calendar, and it just didn't work. And when I would sync it to my phone, I'd try to go back a few months, and all that information would be gone. And then I'd be guessing on what I made on gigs. I think I made this. I think I paid this person this. If it wasn't a W-9 gig, I had a problem tracking it, right? So I never actually knew how much I made. Gig Boss is a way for you to know exactly how much money you're making, and you can filter things by the group that you're playing in. You can filter things by date range, and then you can keep track of your finances and schedules. You can invite your band members to join. You can link charts and recordings in the notes section of the event pages. It's a really slick tool, and we built it just for people like you, for people like me, active musicians who are performing, who are freelancing, who are band leading, right? So I'd encourage you to check that out. I'm really happy you're here for my conversation with Whistler. I know he doesn't do a lot of podcast interviews, so this is a rare look into his inner workings, into the things that he thinks about when he's making art, when he's making his own music, when he's playing in Hippo Campus, how it works. I'm saying Hippo Campus like diabetes, like that guy who's diabetes, right? Hippo Campus. Anyways, awesome band. Definitely, I'm going to be linking all that stuff in the show notes, Whistler's music, the music of Hippo Campus, and I know you're going to enjoy this conversation with Whistler. And before we get started, follow the show wherever you're listening. So if you listen on YouTube, follow the show there. Subscribe to the channel. If you're listening in a podcast app, usually that's a plus sign at the top of the app to follow the show. Then you won't miss any other great episodes of How Musicians Make It. Here's my conversation with Whistler. Dude, thanks for doing this, man.
Yeah, thanks for thinking about me.
Yeah. So you were just on the road. Did you just get back a couple days ago?
Yeah, we got back on, today's Thursday, we got back on Sunday.
Okay. So what is it like now that you've been doing it for, I don't even know how many years. How many years have you been doing it now with Hippo Campus?
This spring is 10 years that since we've started playing together.
10. That makes me feel old. I'm sure Jana feels the same way, having worked with you guys when you were in high school. But
yeah,
that's such a, man, it's amazing how time flies. That's really cool. So is it like, compared to when you first got started, what's touring like now? Are you guys on a bus? Are you on a bus together? Do you have separate buses? How do you guys do it?
Currently, it's been varying. The ideal situation that we have is 2 buses, one for crew and then one for us and our tour manager.
Okay.
And our photographer. And then new to this most recent tour, we had a semi-truck, which was nice. Not that I interact with it as much as others, but yeah, so that's the vibe. But
the semi is like all the gear and everything?
Basically everything, yeah. Yep. Helps alleviate the pain of a bus pulling or 2 buses pulling trailers, which is even more chaotic for logistical reasons.
Yeah, we did that a little bit with Youngblood with a massive bus. It was like the biggest bus you could get in Europe, and then a trailer, and 10 smelly dudes on the bus, plus a tour manager, plus an engineer. It was brutal.
Yeah, we've only had a bus once overseas, and it had a trailer, and if there's a place where you shouldn't ever have a trailer, it's Europe and England, and it's horrible.
Yeah, the streets are so small. I'm always impressed by the bus drivers over there.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. This most recent tour, we were trying to save money where we could, because buses right now, since pandemic, have just skyrocketed in price, and all the good buses are like loaned and leased out by all the big country artists for the entire year, because they just like tour. Their touring schedule is less like us, where we're like 5 weeks on and then a couple months off. They're like every weekend we just bus out and have. Anyway, we ended up going for a Beat the Street bus here, which is like a new thing for that company. And so there was 15 of us all on one bus. We just did one bus for band and crew.
Yeah.
And it was wild.
That's like all the bunks and everything?
Yep, 16 bunks. Felt like it was built in an IKEA warehouse. It was just like rickety and shaking, and I don't know. That, like I said before, that isn't the ideal situation, but anyway. Yeah,
that's interesting that, I don't know, even bands at your level are thinking about ways to cut costs or whatever. And
you have to. That being said, we have such a good team that thinks about that stuff before we have to. We wouldn't really think about it, and we would have to, obviously, if we were actually dealing with it. But yeah, it's something that people don't really understand, I think, about the touring industry, is how fucking expensive it is.
Yeah.
And how much that really does eat and cut into a lot of your, it just like cuts into everything. But as we experienced on this last one with the Beat the Street bus, it doesn't really matter. In the end, it's all about like how can you keep your sanity, and how can you make sure that the crew feels rested and healthy every single morning when they wake up. And unfortunately, the Beat the Street bus is not the answer. Paying the extra premium for the mental well-being and physical well-being is super. If you can do it, it's very much worth it.
Yeah, because you got to put on a great show. Every show, you got to put on a great show, and so you need to be comfortable. Dude, let's rewind. We're talking a little bit about Hippo Campus, but I want to talk a bit about you and just like how you got into the arts, into music. I remember hearing, and I don't know that we've talked about this much, but I remember hearing that you were in the circus as a kid. Mm-hmm. There are some really famous historic musicians that were in the circus. Like Buddy Rich is like a really famous example of somebody who was in the circus as a kid and then became this like massive name in music. What did you do there, and what was your experience like?
That's funny. I had no idea that was like a common thread to an extent.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I've read about it a few times.
I mostly dabbled. There a handful of aerial acts or tumbling or I always struggle to feel like I can fully describe what it is I was doing, because a lot of the times people are like, what the hell is that you just said? But yeah, I did quite a bit of things. I was there for, I think, roughly 10 years. And eventually I think from a combination of circus stuff and just being a child, I injured my lower back and could no longer physically support doing the circus stuff in a comfortable way. It was just too painful.
What 10 years? How old were you when you started?
I had to have been close to 8 or 9.
Wow.
Something like that. And I stopped or maybe younger. I don't honestly fully remember when I started, but it was young. I was a kid. My mom brought me there. I was in gymnastics as a child, so acrobats were a common thing for me and in my family as well. And then my mom heard about the youth circus here, and we went and saw a performance. And of course, I assume most kids do, they see that and they're like, holy crap, I want to do that. That looks fun, because it's also kids doing it. They see themselves very easily. It's not like you're just going to see adults be adults doing crazy things. Yeah. So
I've just started recording the video. No big deal.
But yeah, so I did that, and yeah, I probably ended around, it was maybe more 8 years, I guess, now that I think about it. Ended when I was 16, or I tried going back after my back injury, thinking that it was good, and I was like, this hurts. And also was I'm done with this, emotionally. I just wasn't attached anymore. And
sure.
Yeah.
I imagine that's a huge part of your childhood then, doing that. Were you traveling, or was it a local thing mostly?
No, it's all local. It's all in Highland Park, in St. Paul. Okay. Yeah, no traveling. Yeah.
I didn't even know that existed in Highland Park.
Yeah, it's right over by the golf course there in Highland Park. It's a huge white tent.
Cool. Do you feel like that experience prepared you in any way for the life you have today? You're performing all the time,
yeah.
I imagine.
I would say in terms of performing, circus was one way that I performed a lot as a kid. That was the most consistent and common and potent form of that. I did theater here and there as a child and stuff, but yeah, I think I assume it did. I assume it helped me grow to love the feeling of getting a reaction and grow to be more comfortable with a literal spotlight on you. Yeah, that's the only way I can imagine. Otherwise, aside from drums being a relatively physical instrument, there's not much more there's not much crossover for circus and playing music.
But man, yeah, the performing angle. I talk to so many people that deal with performance anxiety, students that deal with performance anxiety, people that have literally never performed before, and then they have to, it's they're studying music in college, and then they have to go perform for the first time. Mm-hmm. It's having that background, that's got to take the edge off to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah, and to speak to performance anxiety, this might be a little long, but where I think having a history in performance does help the most is in this example of in 2019 I started having performance anxiety for the first time ever. And it was confusing, and I didn't understand what it was. I didn't really ever experience actual just general anxiety until my mid-20s anyway, so it was just all confusing. But it got to a pretty intense point up until even, I still deal with it, but even last fall we were on a tour and I was struggling quite a bit, and it's a terrifying feeling. But where the history of performing helps is it's a reminder that I do love this, because that performance anxiety as anxiety does, it tries to rationalize all this chaotic, irrational stuff.
Yep.
And I'm constantly like, is this what I love? Do I actually like doing this? Do I want to be on stage right now? All these questions that are my anxiety just going with it. And in the end, being able to look back on performing in circus and being on stage in the past and even doing like things at SPCPA when we had to perform or doing talent shows in middle school, like I was always like so stoked and thrilled and extremely nervous when I did those things. And I think it's about tying that nervous feeling back into whatever this anxiety might be right now. So recently, that's been like the biggest help with having that history and that past of performing, is that it's like a reminder that I do love it. And there's a reason that I'm doing it now and have been able to do it forever without the sense of fear or questioning and confusion.
Yeah. Are you working on that in other ways? Like I know people that take beta blockers, eat bananas before performances. That's like all these tricks.
I've been in therapy for about 10 years now. And so it's been a slow progress in that in terms of that's been a help. I've tried some all-natural supplemental stuff to help calm nerves. There's lots of different ways, breathing techniques and stuff. Most recently, a thing that my bandmate Zach had gotten me into is doing this like Wim Hof breathing technique. And he's like this Scandinavian like health guru dude. I don't know. I don't really follow him, but it's this like really specific kind of like hyperventilation breathing technique.
Yep.
That just helps focus, and that's been really helpful on this most recent tour specifically. But yeah, I've been working on it. Last tour we did has been the best tour I've had since experiencing that stuff. In terms of it still happens every once in a while, and I can play a show and be completely in my like anxiety tunnel for half the set, and then all of a sudden it just somehow for some reason goes away, and then I'm like suddenly present, and I don't know how I just did the first half of the set without even being conscious. But
it's interesting. I've definitely been there in terms of playing a song or two and then snapping into reality and going, here I am, now I'm here, I feel better. I imagine that it's encouraging for people to hear that somebody like you that's doing this at a really high level still deals with this, even though it's obviously not a fun thing for you to deal with. It's so many people deal with these kinds of things. Hearing that somebody at that level is dealing with it, I'm sure is some kind of like a light at the end of the tunnel. It's like, oh, okay,
for sure.
I mean, it's okay for me to deal.
Yeah, and sometimes I like look at artists who are even bigger, and I'm like, how the hell do they not crumble? I don't know. I don't think it's talked about nearly enough, because I think a lot more people have it than we know. And that's okay. Anxiety is something that's a personal thing, and it doesn't need to be shared or talked about. But I do think it's helpful to express it, and because if it stays pent up, it stays real and it stays.
Like you said, your mind starts to rationalize things and try to trick you into doing something that you don't really want to do, maybe, like stopping playing music. I definitely, I have never really dealt with anxiety, and then a little bit into the pandemic, I started dealing with it, waking up with a lump in my throat and stuff, and I was like, what is going on? I had never really...
Yeah.
And I cleaned some things out of my life, and I started exercising a lot, and it went away. But it's not as easy a fix for a lot of people. Jana deals with it. Never, it seems like with her, it's never about performing, though. It's other things. It's like performing
for sure
seems to come really naturally to her and everyone in her family.
Yeah.
It's just built into their genes. But speaking of genes, I know your dad pretty well-ish, and he was an actor for a long time, still does it. Did he do that growing up with you? Is that how you got into doing theater things? Was did his influence play any role in you being in the arts?
He wasn't active in the arts when I was growing up. His influence was more just the support of doing it. Like, he was always supportive of me doing that. My mom actually was the more active one in the arts when I was growing up, and I think there's a lot of, yeah, I think that she had a big hand in terms of me actually seeing theater and, like I said, going to the circus. And she was a big extrovert, or is a big extrovert, so she like was very much about finding things and going and doing things. But yeah, I got to see her perform a couple times. Some of the stuff I was just too young, and it was adult. It was just like theater that I wouldn't have understood, or yada yada. So yeah, I think they both played a role. I think the biggest is just that they were both being artists themselves. It allowed for the potential. It allowed me to have the ability to be an artist because they were like in full support of that. And thankfully they didn't do, like, I've heard stories of like parents who were artists and it didn't do well, and then immediately they're like, you're never going to be an artist, because they have like trauma with it. And for them it wasn't that. It was like, please go do it.
Yeah. And you said you went to St. Paul Conservatory for Performing Artists. I remember meeting you and the other Hippo Campus people. I was like subbing for Mike Vosich a little bit. My wife was teaching there. What I remember is like you guys played a lot of different kinds of music and different configurations of people. And like I remember going to your garage one time and there was like a sort of like instrumental jam kind of thing happening. What was that experience like at SPCPA that allowed a band like Hippo Campus to form?
Yeah.
Or is it nothing? Does it have nothing to do with SPCPA?
It does and it doesn't. I think, yeah, that school's changed a lot too. And it changed a lot while in those 4 years that we were there, especially the instrumental program, I think. And I think as much as it was like a bummer then in the moment, we were a big hand in it changing because when I showed up to that school, it was still very freeform in terms of the instrumental track. And it was like, they were allowing and still trying to hone in on what it is that they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And at that time, Bobnik was a big part of that. And he was actually, as much as he is a jazz player himself, was very supportive of branching out and finding different things, and very supportive of the student doing what made them feel fulfilled and happy, and
cool,
which was huge. And not to say that wasn't always the case going forward with other teachers, but I think he went against the grain of the school's desires to an extent to allow the student to really breathe, which I think is super important. But that kind of atmosphere allowed for me, Nathan, and DeCarlo, and our friend David to create a band out of an ensemble from class, basically. You know, it was like the school was pushing for this project, you guys go pick ensembles and do something. I don't know what the assignments were. Of course, being high schoolers, we were like, we're not going to do that. We're going to just do whatever we want, or create a piece of this. So we just went off and we started making that instrumental music, which you definitely saw. And I think we performed in your apartment building once for an Art-A-Whirl thing. Yeah. And that was the birth for me and Nathan and DeCarlo of that like kind of thing. DeCarlo's nonstop playing with everybody and doing everything all the time. But was he playing bass in that? Is that right?
He was. Yeah, that's right.
And at the same time, but not within the school program, Jake and Zach from Hippo created a band, and because it wasn't within the school program, just because Zach, I don't think, was in our high school at the time, or once he was, Jake was in vocal, so they didn't have the luxury of doing that.
Yeah.
Anyway, long story short, the school definitely at the beginning catered to us being able to do that and create this bond as friends by making music, like which is something that you usually have to go out of your way to create, outside of school. So to be able to spend a couple hours every single day just doing that as a part of your like curriculum, it was very helpful. And then eventually the school changed a little bit and they started realizing that was maybe like, I don't know, for some, in their words, not fair to other students or something. It just got weird and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. And
sure.
it's also 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
And it's from my high school, my cloudy high school brain of emotions. But yeah, I guess I'm trying to, that's how it played in. And then Hippo just came, that Hippo came from like the other thing I was talking about, of having to do it yourself and put it together outside of school. Kind of a thing.
So were you guys putting on shows while you were in high school?
Yeah.
How were those going? What kind of venues were you playing when you first got started?
There is, I don't know if it's still a thing, but there at least was a really shitty company called Afton Music or something that would like totally just ruin children's idea, but also wasn't far off from what the actual music industry is in terms of live shows. But it was like, if you sell 10 tickets, then you start making profit, like the thing, like each band on the bill. And so we did a handful of shows there, or with that company. But we played in high school. We played venue. We played the Amsterdam. We played, what was it, Station 4, I think is what it was called, in St. Paul. Yeah. We played the Acadia. We just played all the classic dive bar venues that this company usually had an in on. And sometimes teachers would come out to that. Sometimes they wouldn't. I don't know. It was, we played venues. It was pretty wild now that I think about it, and very formative for what we do now.
Yeah, sure. How do you get from there then to opening for a huge band on tour or something? Did a manager notice you guys? Did an A&R rep find you or something?
So to clarify, that the shows in high school, none of that was ever Hippo either. That was like always the post-rock group that I was in from class, or funny enough, Jake and Zach's band Whistle Kid. And it was like, that was that. In Hippo, we started doing shows the summer of 2013, basically. And nothing super real, because like, why would anybody bill us? We were nobody, basically. So we were doing a lot of random little one-offs that I can't like remember many of them. But Jake was in control of that and was emailing people. And basically where we got a little bit of a lift was we played a show at what was called, I think it was, maybe it's changed its name again. I don't know. I think at the time it was Mill City Nights. I think now it's Minneapolis Music Hall or something in downtown. I don't know what the show was or really why. I think we were playing with, it was like a friend's show that we were playing. And the house lighting guy who was working that came back after our show, which we, of course, to us had the classic, like, that show sucked. Like, we did so bad. We were in such a bad mindset. And he came back and was like, hey, really intense looking dude, like somebody that you're at first glance, you're like, I want to talk to you. And also, why are you talking to us? But he was like, I work for Trampled by Turtles, and I think you guys are really sick. I want to get you connected, yada, yada. And we were like, okay, yeah, whatever. He started showing up to like random shows of ours and trying to prove himself. And eventually we just kept emailing 7th Street and stuff, which, if there's any young bands in Minneapolis, email 7th Street and tell them you can open for people all the time, because they're always looking for local support. Anyway, we got billed onto the first of 3 of a show there, and by that time we had made enough of a connection with that lighting guy, who then put us in connection with our management, and they came out to that show, and that was their first show that they saw of us, and we chatted, and maybe a couple months later we signed with that management team and, made them our managers. And that was like I think that was like September or something, August 2014. And then because of their connections, and they were managing Trampled by Turtles and some other artists at the time, Low and Lizzo, they had booking agents, because of all that, we got everything that came with that. And so by the spring of 2015, we had booked our first opening tour, where we opened for the Mowglis, and we got $150 a night to follow them for 5 weeks across the country.
Oh my God!
Yeah, it was just, that's really as condensed as I can make it with my rambling mind, but yeah,
that seems. I don't know. Like, I can't imagine somebody being like, hey, I want you to open for this band. and we're going to pay you $150 a night as a band. Like at this stage in my life, you know what I mean? That could, it's like you'd have to be in a certain, either, you know, some kind of independently wealthy person, or like you're in a certain stage of your life where you can just, you know, crush ramen noodles and play shows every night and hope that it builds into something.
Yeah.
It seems, it's like I think a lot about our circumstances and the world that forms around us and how those two things interact. And it just seems, yeah, it's like you guys were met at the right time to be able to do that kind of opening gig. I imagine like more opening shows, like more opening tours came out of that. Did you start to build an audience through those openers? Did you feel like those were effective? Like I always wonder, like, should we only play headlining shows? Should we open for bands?
Right. Yeah, yes. I'm trying to think of how to, I think I was just thinking of, like you were mentioning, being of a certain age and like body to be able to handle that. I wasn't even 20. I think I was maybe 20 when that happened, when we left on that for the first time. So we were very young. Zach was 19. Like, we were of the right mind, and it was just like the perfect timing for us. Being like just out of high school, 2 years out of high school, like I'm done working at the grocery store. Just get me out there. Like it didn't matter really the amount of money. All we knew is that we were paying our tour manager and merch lady half. She did everything. She was getting half of that, and the rest of it was just going to gas. Anyway, yeah, we were seeing it as like it's a bit of a gamble. But I guess it didn't feel even like a gamble. It was just like, we're going to do this and hopefully something comes of it. And we were opening for a band that it worked. Like their audience was looking for something, and we happened to be able to supply that. Even being first of three and there being always way less people in the crowd during the first of three, it just worked. And I think caught on a little bit during the tour, and people started like talking, because like the crowds, the fans, like true fan people definitely talk a lot. And that was a while ago. It was 8 years ago, and now it's even more intense with Discord and everything. Like they know exactly what set you're probably going to play the next day and all this stuff. But it caught on. We did another like year, I would have to say like a year and a half of some supporting gigs, while in the middle and in the lulls of all those, like doing headlining runs, like just getting out there back in the van and trying to see what we can do on our own. And we were very fortunate to be able to do that and to have it continuously just keep leveling up and being successful and gaining more following and being able to book bigger venues.
Did you have merch at that time in the early tours?
Yeah, first run we had merch. And I remember being in control of not selling it, but sorting it and rolling it all up. I taped each individual fucking t-shirt. Yeah, man. Rolled each individual t-shirt, which now, like, when I watch our merch person do their stuff, I'm like, that was such a noob way of doing it. Now it's like watching them count through the shirts and they just like fly. I don't know. It was funny. But we had merch, which was also a huge help. If you can get decent merch and you can get people to buy it, that's where you're going to be able to get your $5 or $10 per diem at that level and be able to get some food. And even now, still, merch is such a huge aspect of our touring income that we rely on for sure. And we've historically, for some reason, because our fans are amazing, sell a lot. And we do really well when it comes to merch. I think it's our fans, but then also one of our band members from the band that played in your apartment building and stuff, David, is a graphic designer, and he was designing like all of our stuff for a really long time. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, like the same thing with Youngblood is we would do enough merch that's basically how we're able to pay a 10-piece band. It's like the fan base is super loyal, and it's like without the merch sales, those tours don't happen. It's like there's no way. And we would get in a big advance before a tour to print all the merch, $30,000 or something. And then we'd pay the advance back after. And it's like people are borrowing money from their parents. It's like even still deep into the band's life, it's still that model of borrow money before the tour, print shitloads of merch, sell it all on the tour, pay people back after, but it's enough everybody can get paid.
Yeah, that's still the business model for a lot of bands and stuff. That's what Live Nation lives off of, is advancing money to people and then getting it back over time.
Okay, I didn't even know that's how Live Nation did it.
Can do that. There's that kind of a company. I'm sure there's that I can't think of a handful of others, and we've been fortunate to not do that. But yeah, we've opened for the bands in the past or are friends with bands in the past who, and a lot of the times that's probably what some of these larger artists are doing too, like the arena artists. They just get huge advances, especially at that point, because it's just guaranteed. It's not even a risk. But there are bands who need that bump, what you're talking about with Youngblood, where you guys need a little something, but you're just printing merch for it, which is really the best way to do it, because then it's just going back. It's not, here, give us this money, and then you'll get money from our shows, which is, I don't know. It's a messy...
It can get messy.
World. Yeah.
Yeah. But. So, I didn't have this question written down, but now that we're talking, I'm curious, like, I remember when people first started, like, singing our songs back to us with Nookie Jones, where it was like we'd have a full house and everybody's singing the song, and I was like, damn, this is incredible. Do you have a memory of when fans really started to know your music, singing along with you and like, on shows?
Yeah. I don't have a specific thing. I can only imagine it probably started here in Minnesota. Minnesota was always, especially during the time where we were like really grinding and trying to make something of ourselves outside of Minnesota. Coming back to Minnesota was always a huge sigh of relief. Thankfully, it's been very supportive to us, and yeah, I just remember those shows always being like the goosebump shows.
Cool.
Yeah, I would say it probably took sometime around our first album and a little bit after that is when people started getting it and wanting to sing along. And but
yeah, I imagine those earlier Minneapolis shows where the Goosebump shows, a litmus test, right? I kept feeling that way with Nookie Jones. Man, if we can do this here, like, that means we can do this in any city. We just got to build.
Yeah, you do got to build. But at the same time, at least in our experience, there was a lot of fear of some of the things that have happened for artists in Minneapolis, where it's like they do really well here, and then they can sometimes struggle elsewhere, and Minneapolis can sometimes be weird in that way, where it like is so receptive to their local artists, but then you go elsewhere and everybody's
Yeah, you're forever local.
Yeah, so we really, as much as we love being here and being from Minnesota and being able to put it on the map in a really specific way, and like support now the bands that are coming out of here and our younger peers and whatnot, as much as we love all that, we really pushed as hard as we could to not be a Minnesota band. And I'm sure with you guys, like you're saying, like you noticed, like, this is doing well here, let's fucking go make it do well somewhere else.
Right.
Because it can be, seemingly, historically, it can be pretty easy to get stuck here. And we just wanted to not, obviously, we wanted to be bigger than that. And yeah, it's an interesting thing, Minnesota music scene.
Yeah, cool. So I've got this theory that, for a band to make it to the next level, they need to be able to work through whatever drama arises, because drama will inevitably arise. Don't feel like you need to tell me details, but how does Hippo Campus handle conflicts? Do you feel like you guys are great communicators? Your history as good friends growing up make a difference there?
It does make a difference in the sense that we're bonded. I would not say that we are great communicators. I would say that we all love this project like so deeply that the idea of it failing and not continuing is terrifying. And I think that shared, like unspoken shared feeling and experience is what has kept us together for as long as we have, as long as we've been together, especially without great communication. That being said, when we've needed to, we've been able to sit down and have our fireside chats and yell at each other, express love to each other. But since the pandemic really, like, for the first time in 7 years or whatever it was, since it's been 3 years since then, we didn't pull, like, I hadn't been home for longer than 3 months at a time in 7 years. And so it really just changed a lot for us and really threw everything into perspective a lot more and really forced us all to have to deal with ourselves, but then also learn to be friends again, not just business partners that were friends and are friends, but
right,
like, that's the trickiest part. And so it's taken a while, and those 3 years during COVID have been tricky and challenging, and there's been a lot of changes emotionally and that have been good. And we recently started band therapy together, which has been good, and we do that occasionally, or when we're in the swing of it, we do it weekly or bi-weekly, and that's been very helpful. If anything doesn't, even if nothing comes out of that session that day specifically, what comes out of it is like the fact that the 4 or 5 of us got together that day with the intention to listen to each other, which is helpful.
The opportunity was there.
Yeah, it's a work in progress, and it will always be, but I think the bond of brotherhood kind of that we have from high school, and the fact that we really did build this from the ground up between us, and it wasn't made outside of us really in any other way, is a really helpful factor into us. It's truly our child and our baby, and it's like you're married to a handful of people. I'm not actually married, but that's like an analogy that my therapist brought up right away. It's you have to share a life with, and so keeping the small things small is really important.
Yep.
But also express things when you need to express things, because if you don't, then it just builds up, and we're pretty avoidant humans, the 4 of us.
Sure.
Or the 5 of us, with DeCarlo and stuff. We're all just, and then anytime we actually do talk, it's actually good. I don't know. That's a long.
No, that's great. It's great to hear, and that's a good lesson for anybody that's trying to make a run with a band. It has miscommunication or no communication or whatever drama has killed a lot of great projects.
Yeah.
I got other questions about Hippo Campus, but man, I've been listening to your music mostly leading up to this, and it's just been really fun to listen to your music. I really like it, genuinely. And when I first started searching for it, I searched on YouTube and I found an acoustic version of Baseball Cap from something you did in 2020 during the pandemic. You did an online thing.
Oh, yep.
And it was beautiful, and I was like, man, this is beautiful. And it's just you and your acoustic guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And then I heard the album version, and I was like, holy shit. Just like the production, the electronics. So I guess I have some questions about like how you go from writing a song on guitar to making it, and the choreography. Oh man, it's beautiful. How you go from making it like an acoustic thing into this like sort of pop landscape. Did you work with a producer? Is that all like you fumbling around at home? How did that come together?
Yeah, so my writing process tends to always be, for the most part, just me and acoustic guitar. I'm just not like a strong melodic instrumentalist in terms of an instrument. Like, it's a lot of fumbling on the acoustic guitar and finding the thing, or fumbling on the piano and finding the thing. But outside of that, like, I have no strong talent with a melodic instrument. So it's always a frustrating process. And anyway, but the production mindset of it all, I guess I tend to lean towards that kind of super percussive pop space. Something that has like a really specific repetitive groove, and
which you could say about Baseball Cap, but like the beginning, the way it starts and like how it gets ambient for a second and then it goes into that repetitive groove. The beginning has that almost, I almost picture like a circus, like the home chink home chink home chink. It kind of has that thing at the beginning, a little off kilter, and you're floating over it with your vocals. I don't know, whatever. Such a cool.
No, yeah, and that EP I think is credited as produced by me, but which I guess it is to an extent. But specifically that song, I worked with Caleb on most of those songs. Our friend Caleb, who produces, he went to high school with us as well. You've definitely at least interacted with him a couple times. But he is now, he's like our Hippo's current producer and did our most recent record and EP with us. But anyway.
Man, that is so wild.
Yeah.
I don't know, whatever. That's so wild that like everybody you work with, a lot of them are SPCPA.
It's still
obviously in the band, but like production and graphic design early on, at least you were saying.
Yeah, that was a potent class of creative students.
Yeah.
And they're all instrumental students, which is wild. But yeah, the production stuff, I just showed up or actually I went away for a couple weeks to a place that my mom's family owns in Colorado and just sat by myself and tried to reimagine that song, because that song specifically had been that acoustic version for a really long time.
Yep.
Very singer-songwriter kind of stuff. And I just started playing with a TR-8 and adding some groove to it. And that's when that aspect of my songwriting started, where I like would find a beat and also then fumble along with the guitar, which did help. And obviously, it's funny to hear me say that because it sounds so basic in comparison to things. But Caleb was definitely helpful in terms of expanding that world, and Nathan helped and Jake helped on that one, like to create some of the crazy sounds, and Nathan's doing all the like fluttery guitar and
which it sounds like some of that you like put in reverse or like did effects too and stuff.
You just literally do whatever you want.
It's cool.
And I was like raised with Coldplay, and like I was just raised with that kind of power alternative anthemic rock music. So that's definitely that's like a big influence on that EP, I think, for sure. And Radiohead was also a big influence. It always is. But yeah, I don't know how. It was pretty wild that song just became as epic as it became production-wise, because it was literally just the version you saw of me doing acoustic stuff. And then it just blossomed into this like wild. It's interesting to see it as a circus performance almost.
Yeah, especially at the beginning, I just had that. Yeah. And it's probably because I knew of your history with that, but it's just I heard that in the soundscape of that real early chunky chunk thing that's going on under your vocals. I think the real strength in your music is the transparency, is like the storytelling. So you're talking about how your parents sat you down with a fire burning, told you that they were going to be splitting up, and the whole record feels a bit like therapy to me. I imagine that music for you is therapeutic. Is that true?
100%. Yeah. I think it's a double-edged sword for me, that transparency. I want to be able to be more cryptic and less obvious in my lyrics, but I really struggle to do. And the reason I have a desire to do that is just because I feel like, for example, bands like Coldplay, sometimes that feeling of obvious lyrics and very transparent words can come off a bit hokey, and so I tend to have an insecurity about that of, this is just such basic wordage. It's not, whoa, that's such great. People like Jake and Nathan too are like really good at combining words to tell a story, but also make it super unique, and you're not going to guess the next word that they say. But anyway, the transparency thing that was honestly a potential name for the EP, actually, now that I'm remembering that as transparency. But it was too on the nose. It was too on the nose, and I felt, God damn it, that's like way too cliche. That was like the influence even through to the album artwork I made. Like, it's all those photos that are like meant to be one collage that are all just, yeah, it is therapeutic for me. The music's therapeutic. I can't not write and sing about the shit that damaged me and the shit that also helped me grow. And to anybody who continues to listen, I'm sorry if you get bored of that. It's just how I think I'm having to accept that's just like who I am and what I'm going to be doing. So
yeah. And then obviously over time that refines, and we're pushed into new areas because we're continuing to create. I think that's a beautiful part of the process of being a musician and being an artist that releases music in the long term. Not just like, here's one album and now I'm going back to working at whatever this job is and never playing music again.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, just keep going. How did the choreographer, you worked with the choreographer, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
How did that stuff come together? Did you have any input on how that would look?
Man, that was that was crazy. So the choreographer is Laura. I don't know how to pronounce her actual last name. Her last name's hard to pronounce. Let me find it here. Laura Osterhaus. That's what it is. Laura Osterhaus. Also, so she's tight. I met her through our now keyboardist, Sam Rosenstone.
Oh, yeah. Sam's been out with you guys. I remember.
Yeah. So they're married.
Okay.
And so his wife, Laura, was the person that I talked to about doing that. And for some reason, I just had an itch when I was making that project to do the thing that kind of terrifies me the most, which is dance. Partially because I know if I were to ever focus in dancing in my life, like if I were to focus on dancing in my life, I feel like I could become really good at it. I just have that super egotistical confidence about myself in that sense. But I just like trust and know that my body can do things when I want it to physically. Yeah. Anyway, so I was like, I'm going to do this. It terrifies me to express myself this way because I'm like pretty reserved in that sense. And no, I didn't really have much input on the choreography. I could have, but I didn't know what I was doing. And she just came up with all of it. And I for sure was like, I don't want to be the only person. I want 2 other dancers, which the 2 dancers that are in that group are freaking crazy. And they're top-notch dancers that I very much am thankful and very grateful for their willingness to do that with me.
Yeah.
The video, I had my friend Robin shoot it. He was the cameraman, and he did the first edit, and then I did a little bit of editing, and then I hired this editing and production duo out of New York to affect it in the way that it's affected. And they basically projected it onto a wall and then filmed the projection, which is why it's framed like that and is like a different color and all of that.
Yeah, I did have that thought. This is an interesting choice, especially because so much is consumed on cell phones now. It's like the video is actually smaller because of the way it's framed. So I didn't look at it on the cell phone. I was watching it on my laptop, but I thought, I wonder what this looks like on a phone.
Yeah.
And I kind of like the idea of fuck everyone who looks at things on phones and listens to things without headphones in. You know, like that idea of like, we're going to do this way. But yeah, so I don't know that I have a question surrounding that, but I just thought that was an interesting choice.
No, I never even thought about that. I probably should have. But yeah, that's what a lot of that project was too. Was just like, I just wasn't really thinking. I thought a little bit about how the audience would perceive any of it, but as soon as I started doing that, then I just was like not doing it for me anymore. And even then, I did release that for me. I needed to do that, but there is an aspect of my bandmates releasing music as well that pushes me to be like, oh, maybe I should release something. And I've been battling with that a lot recently of why do I want to release something again? Do I want to release something again because I truly want this thing to be heard for my own need and need for expression and stuff? Do I need to get this story out there? Or am I doing it because I feel like I need to be heard as a member of Hippo Campus in a way that I'm not when I'm just Hippo Campus? And like all these other people are like being able to do that and are doing, you know, like maybe they're getting better streaming than I am, or all that. It's like a gross competition at a certain point.
Is the motivation internal or is the motivation external?
And Yep, and that's why I don't do podcasts all the time, because you said that in 4 or 5 words, and I still haven't been able to figure that out. But yeah,
I think it's something everybody deals with. And like, I mean, we got into music because we were drawn to self-expression. I'm sure of it. But also there is an aspect of feeling the energy of a crowd and feeling the energy of people who are listening to your music and getting external validation. And it's like all these things are things we grow accustomed to, are things that we enjoy feeling. And I can get how that can feel phony and that can feel like it comes from an insincere place. But I try to bury all that shit. Like for me, I love making music. I love playing music. That's always been how it's been for me. And so I try not, although I am now thinking a little bit more about, because I play music that's maybe traditionally not as popular, it's like, where is the intersection between what people want to hear and the music that I want to make, and how can I maybe amplify that a little bit? I do think about that now. But also I have, it's like all of this stuff happens in in solitary confinement. It's like I'm creating in a space that is blocked off from that. And so it still feels very right to me. It's just, I don't know, everything you're saying resonates.
No, and all that resonates. That's what we go through every time everything you just said about trying to balance, like, making the music you want to make and the music that people will receive, and then yet at the same time you're still just making it completely like locked in this little room with whoever, and you don't actually know. All of that is what we go through every single time we start to do it, and I can only imagine that's what everybody goes through every time. Like, that's the craziest part about it, is like no matter what type of music you're making, you're always going to be thinking about that aspect. You're always going to, you just can't help but want to please, while also, it's hard to please both parties. It's hard to please the crowd and please oneself in terms of what you want to make, and at a certain point you just gotta, I don't know. I was about to say, at a certain point you just gotta do what you gotta do, but then also sometimes it doesn't, sometimes like doing what you want doesn't work, and then you experience that and you're like, damn.
Yeah.
How do I, like, thank God there's 3 other dudes in the room with me right now, like, helping me make a decision, because I could never do it.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of famous writers work with other writers too. There's like a lot of collaborative writing going on in the world, and that's probably a reason, is that, like, hey, sometimes we're better when we're bouncing ideas off of other people who maybe have strength in areas where we don't have strengths, or who complement us in certain ways. Is the Young Blood stuff just you? Like, you are the only person writing? No, I actually haven't done hardly any writing for that band. We've done some stuff recently for sync licensing where I've done some writing, and I'm hoping that stuff ends up on a record. But the main person who writes and arranges for that is Nat McIntosh. And then it is collaborative, though. It's like somebody will come up with a lick or a groove, and then they'll send it out to other people, and they'll come up with some melodies over it, and it'll eventually stack into a tune. And a lot of that's done remotely, since the band lives all over the United States and Europe. And then it'll come together and do the thing in person. But yeah, the band hasn't played since the pandemic, and so the plan is to do stuff again in 2024. But I've arranged a bunch of the music for ensembles that can purchase sheet music, big bands and things like that at schools. But I definitely like to write some for Youngblood. I mean, like, my orchestra is really my... Yeah, for sure. I'm writing songs and stuff like that, and releasing some stuff like that too now. But like the Adam Meckler Orchestra is really my... And when you do the writing for the orchestra, do you ever like branch out or reach out for input and like collaboration, or is it just like, I'm gonna do this by myself and then it's gonna be done and it's gonna be? It's all just me. Like, very rarely. So what I've done recently is I've created beds, and then I've brought in hip hop artists and singers to create their own things on top of it. And so that aspect of collaboration has been really interesting and fun for me. And I'm working on a new project right now where I had 6 producers sample my big band music and turn it into
Whoa.
like beats and other kinds of songs. And then I'm collaborating with like singers and hip hop artists and horn players and creating new songs out of these previously recorded and like heavily composed pieces that are now just these like loops. That's been really fun for me.
Tight.
It's been very much whatever you hear in whatever song, make a beat.
When is that? Has that been coming out, or is that going to come out as like a release, or is it not going to be, or what? Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be released eventually. I won a grant to do it, so I've been working on it for a year and a half. It's been a long process. And I was just in the studio a couple of days in Minneapolis last week working on it, and I'm going to do that again a few days in August. And it's got to be done by the end of the year based on the grant. No matter what, it'll be done. And then we'll see. I've released some stuff on Rope-A-Dope Records out of Philadelphia, and I'll reach out to them, and I think it's right up their alley. They do, like weird instrumental music that has hip-hop elements and other things that are jazz-ish, on the fringes of jazz.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of like trumpet playing on it and stuff like that. So there's definitely those elements. Yeah, I bet like when I'm composing, it's very insular. It's like me and the piano. And then a lot of times it's like putting whatever piano thing I've come up with either into Pro Tools or Logic and layering things there, or into a notation software like Finale. And
Oh yeah, I was going to ask if that ever. I was like, if you're just composing in Pro Tools, that's nuts. That'd be crazy.
Yeah,
you'd have to use
it
a
is
notation
crazy
software at some point, I'm sure.
It's wild too, because it's like notation software and Pro Tools and Logic generally don't play nice together. And I feel like I think I've heard that Dorico plays much nicer now with Logic, but I haven't tried that. But it'd be real nice to make nice mock-ups of these compositions before.
Is it Sibelius that's Avid?
Yeah. I think that's
which
right.
Is just worse
and
than
I don't
Finale.
use Sibelius. I used Finale growing up, and so.
Yeah, that's just what you're used to.
Like, dude, I've been using Finale for 20 years.
Yeah.
That's insane.
That's like me with Pro Tools. It's the idea of using like Ableton and Logic. I'm like, I could really just spend time doing this, but like, I don't need to.
Yeah, I learned to edit on Pro Tools from a friend, Jason McGlone, who's an engineer in Minneapolis, great engineer. And he like taught me how to edit on Pro Tools, and so it's been hard for me to do anything else because I'm like so fluent now with that. And Finale is the same way. And once I get into it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is my little world. But I've now had a pretty long break where I haven't, because I've been working on this record that's really different than anything I've worked on before. I'm not looking at scores and stuff like I usually am when I'm in the studio with my orchestra.
Yeah.
So it's been a fun process to get a little bit out of my comfort zone and be more of like a producer and just layer things and then keep things and move things around. And it's a lot different than recording with my orchestra in the more traditional sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you have coming up? What are you doing? Are you working on more music? The EP came out a year ago now. Is that right?
No, we had an album come out. Me.
Yeah, you. New Hippo. I wanted to ask about the New Hippo because the New Hippo, to me, man, that sounds like 1990s alternative rock nostalgia to me.
Yeah.
In a really 100%. Interesting way that I was not expecting. But what are you up to?
Oh man, what am I up to? I might dabble with some tunes and try and get something out there. Yeah, the EP came out in 2017 or no. 2017. 2021.
21, yeah.
And yeah, I don't have any plans to release a project. I think that is the motivation. Like, where's the motivation coming from is still a question for me. So I'm still trying to figure that out. And there was like a Rick Rubin clip that I saw that was just like him being like, release everything whenever. Don't limit yourself to releasing something because you're worried about what people might think about it, especially if you're an up-and-coming artist. And I am not trying to make something of myself as an individual artist. I'm just trying to remind myself every time when I start thinking about a release that this is simply just for me. It's not for the purpose of becoming something.
Right. Which you have the luxury of doing because you have this really successful project.
Yeah.
That's great.
Obviously, it's really hard to tell your ego that. It's something that helps me, like, take the weight off a little bit and not be like, is this mix perfect? Is this song perfect the way it is? Can I release this, or will I just regret that? And it's, who fucking cares? Nobody cares. Only you care. And if you think it sounds pretty cool, just polish it a little bit, and then somebody else is going to think it sounds amazing. Like, somebody will love it. That's a guarantee. It's just, it's, can you love it no matter what?
Yep.
So I don't have any plans. I'll probably dabble here and there, write some stuff this summer. But otherwise, it's just back into that like domestic grind. My girlfriend and I own a home, and so we're just like taking care of that and doing yard work, and we have to get our roof replaced. It's just a lot of
real
adult shit, and that is like a part of, like, I hand washed our car the other day, like cleaned out like that kind of stuff, like really, especially after a 5-week tour, fills my cup like crazy.
Yeah, cool.
Because it just is like normal life. Tour is my normal life, but it's not. It doesn't feel that way when in the grand scheme of things. So being able to come home and just be like with my cats and my girlfriend and watch Succession, and it's an insane luxury that I can do that. Come home and not have any worries really, other than having a cold or something like that. But yeah. So for me, not much. Just waiting for Hippo to start doing stuff, and yeah.
It's awesome. Thanks, man. I appreciate you taking time to do this.
Yeah.
It's been really fun to watch your successes, and I know there's a lot of people rooting for you, including me.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for inviting me, and it was cool to hear about your thoughts on what I've done on my own and stuff. It's always nice to not just talk about Hippo all the time.
Yeah. I understand that. Cool. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate you.
Hopefully I see you around Minneapolis sometime.
Yeah, I'm here for the foreseeable future, so.
Cool.
Hell yeah. Take care.
Right. Thanks so much for listening to my conversation with Whistler Isaiah. If you dig the show, please tell a friend. You can find all the links to Whistler's music in the show notes. See you at the next one.